When I was a kid, we used to joke about the fact that my mom's dad, who we called Pop-Up, had a remarkable, if perhaps melodramatic capacity for enthusiasm. If he ate a good meal, or maybe even a bad meal, or read an interesting article, he would talk about it all the time for weeks. More often than not, after a meal at the diner down the street from their house on Long Island, he would lean back, wipe his mouth with a napkin, take a deep breath, and with a huge smile on his face declare, "It's good to be alive." As a kid, I thought this was funny and maybe a little over the top. And looking back now, I think that he possessed a kind of wisdom that many of us spend our lives trying to learn. He had this way of sinking so deeply into an otherwise totally unremarkable moment that the moment magically became something worth celebrating. From my perspective as a kid looking up to him, I saw a man who refused to treat ordinary life as merely the space between extraordinary events. For him, dinner at the diner was where life and meaning-making really happened. Pop-Up was not a religious person, but I think his natural disposition of Heschel's radical amazement, even at mediocre tuna melts, reflected an important spiritual practice, one that we can learn a lot from in this week's Parsha. So this week we have a double Parsha of Matot Maseh, and it comes at the very end of the book of Numbers, the end of the book of Bamidbar, when we start looking back on the 40 years. For a long time now, the 40 years have been ahead of us, or we've been in the middle of it, and now we're starting to turn our back on those 40 years as we prepare to conclude the book of Bamidbar and move into Devarim. And as this wandering in the wilderness comes to a close, somewhat notoriously, Maseh includes a very long list and a dense list of the 42 encampments that the Israelites made over the course of those wandering years. Many of these places are obscure. They aren't even mentioned anywhere else in the Torah. This is the first time that we learn about them. And the retelling of all of these stops is very long. And so one of the classic questions on this Parsha that all the commentators ask is, why do we spend so many verses on these otherwise unremarkable places when moments like, the binding of Isaac and Noah's flood receive only a fraction of that attention? This week I was drawn in particular to Rabbi Shai Held's interpretation of these passages. Rabbi Held suggests that the text is reminding us that even seemingly inconsequential stops on our journey can be powerful opportunities for serving the divine, for doing good, for making meaning, for living life to its fullest. Moments that feel incidental might in fact be brimming with possibility. He points out that strikingly, in that long list of 42 encampments, the encampment at the foot of Mount Sinai gets exactly the same treatment as nearly all of the other stops on the way. That moment of moments, Sinai, so often raised above every other moment in Jewish history, is listed right along the Israelites' stays in places like Dofka and Alush and Ritma and all sorts of other cities we don't recognize, as if to say, don't overlook what happened in Dofka and Alush and Ritma. On the long journey from Egypt to the Promised Land, there was probably enormous spiritual work that took place in those cities. Who knows what experiences our ancestors had in those places, and what kind of growth and meaning-making took place in those seemingly unremarkable stops along the way. In his commentary, Rabbi Held wrote about how in modern life, we're often tempted to think that one of the many components of our lives is real life, is Sinai, the main event, and everything else is secondary, or maybe everything else serves that one main purpose. We think that work is real life, and everything else, friends and exercise and eating healthily, must, even begrudgingly, bend around the gravitational pull of our work. Or maybe we think that time with our families is real life, and everything else must simply be survived and gotten through in order to make our family time possible. But as we all know, and as surely many of us here have found out the hard way, myself very much included, this can be an exhausting way to live. Those of us who pour all of our energy and life force into our work often come to regret the relationships and the passions that we've neglected. And those of us who treat our work merely as a means of funding the rest of our life can end up spending most of our waking hours feeling disconnected from a deep sense of purpose. We know that a meaningful life can't be built by treating most of the content of our days as necessary evils while we anticipate the arrival of the important events. Over and over, our tradition asks us not to divide our world into holy moments and ordinary moments. Instead, it asks us to discover that every part of life can become a place where we encounter the divine, where we cultivate gratitude, where we pursue justice, and where we make meaning. The work of becoming fully human, fully alive, fully awake to all of the blessings around us isn't reserved for those mountaintop experiences. It's meant to happen in the mundane moments of our days. I think Pop-Up understood this deep lesson of Massey's long recounting of all of those stops very well, that our lives don't need to feel like a small handful of spectacular moments surrounded by many forgettable ones, and that instead we can meet ordinary moments with extraordinary attention and presence, and then they can become the very places where meaning and purpose blossom. And of course, Shabbat is the time when we can best practice this kind of attention and attunement. It's a day to finally slow down and collect ourselves and be present for the blessings of shared meals and the joy of conversation and the miracle of simply being alive. But what makes Shabbat even more powerful is how it can inform how we live during the other 6 days of the week. This day that we're entering is like spiritual training ground, a place where we practice giving our full attention to what's in front of us without rushing through it to what comes next, so that when we do exit Shabbat and return to real life, we can carry some of that mindful awareness back out with us. So may this Shabbat help us to rediscover, like our ancestors in each of those encampments in the wilderness, that no place and no moment and no stop on our journey, and perhaps even no tuna melt, is beyond the possibility of holiness and meaning making and amazement. Shabbat Shalom.